This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 606, entitled What Masculists Want, a Manifesto for Gender Politicians. Description. This flyer provides a Masculist manifesto, a step-by-step political program for the menfairing of society and the gender laws. It consists of two main steps, that is, educating society that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and then the establishment of the GECs, Gender Equality Committees, that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, who then menfair the gender laws by legislating the paternity rejection right, the OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births, to block female paternity fraud, etc. These steps are necessary if society is not to wipe itself out due to mass rejection of paternity by young men who refuse to face a 1 in 4 chance of being butchered in the hated, fluffy feminist, hypocrite, genocider dominated divorce court system. Flyer itself. What Masculists Want, a Manifesto for Gender Politicians, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer spells out what the Masculists want in the form of a manifesto that should be useful to gender politicians who want to see men liberated from traditional gender roles that oppress them. It takes a rather political point of view, laying out step by step what the Masculists see that needs to be done to liberate men, billions of them, over the next few decades. This flyer begins with a few preliminaries to set the scene, then launches into its step-by-step program needed to liberate billions of men. The feminists have had a monopoly over gender politics for the past 6 decades, since the rise of the second-wave feminists in the 60s. Now it's men's turn as the Masculists rise up and toss off their traditional role of being man's slaves to women, working for women for decades of their lives. The time is now ripe for men to do this, since the preconditions that allow men to reject traditional man's slavery are now largely satisfied. It was men who liberated women in the sense of freeing women from household drudgery and having to take care of a large number of kids. That was a lifelong, in brackets, a short life, job. It was men who gave women science-based medicine, which resulted in women having a life expectancy now of 85 years. It was men who gave women the pill, so that women can choose how many kids they want, which is usually 0, 1 or 2. It was men who gave women household gadgets and higher education. Thus, even those women who stay at home for some years while their kids are very small, they still have a career window of half a century. So the Masculists are now standing up, pointing the finger at women, telling them, quote, "Now that you women can work, you must work, since anything else is man's slavery, and man's slavery will get you killed." Masculists are abolitionists who equate fluffydom with man's slavery. A fluffie is a Masculist label for a traditional woman who expects to be able to live off the labour and money of a man for decades of his life, thus manslaving him for decades. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies, seeing them as manslaving, divorce-raping vermin to be effectively exterminated by being totally ignored, not even pumped and dumped, so that their fluffy genes are removed from the gene pool. Masculists see fluffies and fluffy feminists as the enemy and are at war with them. Masculists are out to kill their enemies slowly by totally ignoring them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at, forced to die slow, miserable deaths for being the horrible gender criminals that they are, committing massive gender crimes against men, such as manslavery, divorce, rape, forced fathering, etc. Thus, Masculists apply enormous moral pressure on women to get off their fat parasitic asses and FIP up, that is, become FIPs, equals financially independent persons, by bothering to get career competent educations at high school and college so that they can be FIPs as adults and not expect fluffie style to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus manslaving him for decades, with one chance in 4 for married fathers, butchering him in the hated fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts, ripping his kids away from him with a 90% probability, forcing him to give his house to his ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it, be forced to pay for his kids whom he will barely be allowed to see, be forced to give her half his wealth, half his stuff, and if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral obligation on her to FIP up, so that she remains a manslaving, divorce-raping parasite off him for the rest of his life. This massive gender injustice that occurs to roughly one father in 4 is usually called divorce rape, which makes Masculists militarily hateful and at war against the fluffies and the fluffy feminists who took over the divorce courts in the 70s as a result of the rise of the second wave feminists. Feminism is a profoundly misandrist, genocentric ideology that preaches that gender oppression is a one-way street, that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed. Feminism says nothing about how women oppress men. For example, the big 3 mentioned above, that is women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, etc. When the feminists, the fluffy feminists, took over the divorce courts, they brought with them their traditional expectations of men. That is, they saw men as cash machines, whose role in life is to pay for women to have babies. So when the divorce occurred, these fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges saw the divorcing man as a cash machine who is to continue to pay for the mother and her kids. As a result, one father in 4 gets butchered in the fluffy feminist divorce courts, a war issue for the Masculists that fill them with anger and hatred, aiming to exterminate their enemies by effectively annihilating them slowly, by totally ignoring them. Politically minded Masculists are out to profoundly change society so that manslavery and divorce rape are removed from daily life by the creation of what the Masculists call a FIP society. That is, one in which both sexes, especially young girls, are socialised by parents and educated by teachers to be FIPs as adults, so that the divorce courts can operate on a principle of financial independence. That is, both divorcing parties, the man and the woman, the father and the mother, are both expected to be FIPs, so that custody of the kids is automatically made joint, so that there is no halving of wealth and stuff, so that the concept of alimony is thrown out, so that women are seen to be FIPs and responsible adults and not fluffy, manslaving vermin. To produce such a FIP society, there will have to be some profound changes in society. Society will need to be masculisted so that everyone becomes bi-conscious, that is, aware that gender oppression is a two-way street, that not only do men oppress women, but women also oppress men, and in fact worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men are horrible and last decades, e.g. the big 3 mentioned above, which are monstrous gender crimes against men, which cause Masculists to hate women who commit these massive gender crimes against men. So the Masculists need to educate society into Masculist ideas, converting most people from being monoconscious, in brackets, that is only having their feminist consciousness raised, close brackets, to biconscious, in brackets, that is having both their feminist and their Masculist consciousnesses raised, so that they see clearly that gender oppression goes both ways and that women oppress men worse, far worse. Since the feminists have had a monopoly over gender politics for the past 6 decades, converting very angry monoconscious feminists to bi-conscious feminists will take a lot of energy on the part of the bi-conscious masculists. A woman who has been brainwashed all her life that gender oppression is a one-way street, that is, by men against women, is going to have a hard time adjusting her gender political vision from monoconsciousness to bi-consciousness, and will, in most cases, find the masculist case ridiculous and dismissible, which is why we can expect many verbally vicious confrontations between monoconscious feminists and bi-conscious masculists over the next few years, as bi-conscious masculists see monoconscious feminists as MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, who are closed-minded to the idea that gender oppression is in fact a two-way street, and that women commit horrible gender crimes against men. So for the next few years, the main task of the masculist movement is to educate society that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that there need to be GECs, GECs, gender equality committees, established in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are treated equally, which is not the case today. Masculists are particularly hateful of the hypocrisy of monoconscious feminists who are angry at masculists when these men push for the menfairing of the gender laws. Bi-conscious masculists see such monoconscious feminists as hypocrites and bigots and bite their fucking heads off with real male verbal aggression and hatred. These GECs will then menfair the gender laws so that society does not wipe itself out. The fluffy feminists have made divorce so toxic for men that they have made marriage and paternity toxic for men. So in many countries today, 2/3 and growing of young men refuse to marry and reject paternity, preferring to live the MGTOW, MGTOW lifestyle, men going their own way. That is, rejecting marriage, refusing to be fathers, and spending their money on themselves. Young women are increasingly panicking as they find, with boyfriend after boyfriend, that these men refuse to give them their sperm, since they reject fatherhood, thus crashing the birth rate and wiping out whole populations. But they are merely reacting to the toxicity of divorce created by the hated, hypocritical, genocidal, fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts. The masculists will put enormous pressure on the male half of the GECs, GECs, that is the male masculist half, to menfair the gender laws, especially the legislation of the that's paternity rejection right, that will give men the same right that women have today to reject an unwanted pregnancy by allowing a man to fill in a government para form stating that he rejects the pregnancy, so that if the mother continues the pregnancy to term, then she pays full costs of the kid until it is an adult. In a FIP society, the mother can, which is one of the many reasons why masculists push so hard for the fipping of women and the creation of a FIP society to free men from manslavery and divorce rape. These GECs will also legislate the OPTAB, OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth, for all births, to block women's paternity fraud. If the man can prove his female partner has committed paternity fraud, then he can criminalise her and put her in jail for 15 years for committing a major gender crime against a man. Women's forced fathering, that is, forcing a man to pay for a kid that he doesn't want, is a huge gender crime against him. Many women lie to their man that she's taking the pill, isn't, gets pregnant, then forces him to pay for the kid for decades, a huge gender crime against him. Hence the need for the para. The fact that women have the mara and men don't have the para fills masculists with a burning hatred against the massive gender injustice that this gender inequality creates, the worst of its kind, in either direction, man to woman or woman to man. The Masculists will push the GECs hard to menfair the gender laws and to make men more willing to be fathers again. Otherwise we wipe ourselves out, as the large majority of men refuse to be fathers, being unwilling to face a 1 chance in 4 of being butchered in the hated fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts. Thus, summarising, the 2 main steps in the Masculist Manifesto are: 1. Educating society that gender oppression is a 2-way street, and 2. The creation of the GECs to menfair the gender laws so that men are prepared to be fathers again, so that we don't crash the birth rate down to extinction. Thus the menfairing of the gender laws is of critical importance, a necessity for the very survival of our species. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 600 plus Masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.